The settlement ran to 4 pages, and Rosalind Meade found her own name on the 3rd of them, set down between a debt for coal and a grey mare. She read the line twice, standing at her uncle's writing table with her bonnet strings still tied, because she wanted to be certain she had understood it. Item, the mare Juno, aged 7. Sound, item, Rosalind Ann Meade, spinster, of this parish. Item, 4 chests of surveying papers and instruments, the property of the late Josiah Meade. She was worth, it seemed, rather less than the mare and rather more than the coal. "You were not meant to read that," said her uncle from the doorway. "You left it open, sir. I left it drying." Ambrose Quillen came into the room and turned the pages face down, one at a time, the way a man tidies a thing he has already decided not to be ashamed of. He was a land agent, and he had the land agent's habit of speaking about people the way he spoke about acreage, in terms of what could be got out of them before the season turned. "Sit down, Rosalind. I would rather stand." "Then stand." He sat himself, which was answer enough about how the conversation was to run. "Your father died owing £460. I have carried that debt for 2 years and 11 months out of family feeling, and family feeling has a bottom to it, like anything else. My father's instruments are worth 200 at least. His maps of the Nethercross Valley alone are sold." He said it evenly. "To Mr. Culliver of Fallowfield." The chests went out on the Tuesday cart. Rosalind did not move. Outside the window a starling was working at the gutter, and she listened to it for the space of 3 breaths because it was easier than listening to herself. Her father had drawn every hedge and headland between the sea and the high moor. He had taught her to hold the chain when she was 9 years old, standing her in a wet furrow with the brass handle in both fists, and he had told her the only 2 things he considered worth knowing. The first was that a map is a promise, and the second was that the arithmetic must always close. If you walked a boundary and set down every bearing and every measure honestly, then when you came back to the place you started, the figures would come home to the same point. 63 chains and 40 links out, 63 chains and 40 links home. If it did not close, somebody had lied, or somebody had blundered, and it was your business to find out which. "And me," she said. "I am on the Tuesday cart as well. Don't be theatrical." Page 3, item 4. "I have read it, uncle. I am asking what I was sold for." "You are to be married," he said, "by license, on the 14th. "To whom?" "To the Duke of Wraycombe." The starling went on at the gutter. Rosalind found that her hands had gone cold inside her gloves. Everyone in the county knew the name, and nobody said it kindly. Gideon Ansell, 9th Duke of Wraycombe, who had come home from the Spanish coast in the year 1809, with half his face and one hand burned, and a finding against him from a court of inquiry that had stopped just short of calling him a murderer and had ruined him more thoroughly than a verdict would have done. 200 men had been aboard the transport Aurelia when she took fire in the roads. 41 of them had not come off her. The inquiry had found that the officer of the watch left his post, had not found him guilty of anything, and had simply written down that his conduct was not such as the service could approve, and then let him go home, which meant that for 9 years every drawing room between Exeter and the sea had been free to finish the sentence however it liked. They said he had fired the ship himself over a gambling debt. They said he kept the burnt coat in a glass case. They said he had a thing out on Ellersmoor that he fed at night, and that if you were fool enough to be on the high road after dark, you would see the light of it going out across the peat, low down, moving steady, the way no honest lantern moves. He is a monster, Rosalind said, by common report. He is a duke, said her uncle, by act of God, and dukes with ruined names are the only kind a Meade may reach. He drew a paper toward him. Lavinia was offered first. I imagined she would be. She had hysterics for 2 days and would not come down. Her mother sided with her. He shrugged, a small movement of the shoulders that dismissed his own household. You have more bottom than the pair of them. And you have something Lavinia has not. A back that does not object to being turned to the wall? Your father's hand, her uncle said. Wraycombe did not ask for a wife Rosalind, he asked for Josiah Meade's girl. Those were his words, in his own writing, and I have the letter. She had not expected that. It went through her oddly, like cold water on a tooth. Why? There is an act through Parliament for the enclosure of Ellersmoor and the wastes of the manor of Wraycombe. The commissioners sit at Lady Day. His Grace wishes to keep his moor and cannot, because no man in 3 parishes will take his word for the boundary of a duck pond. Quillen smiled without any warmth at all. Your father surveyed that moor in 1791. Wraycombe wants the survey. The survey is in a chest at Fallowfield now, but the hand that copied it out and the head that remembers it are standing in front of me in a wet bonnet. So there it was. She was not being married. She was being lent, the way a level or a theodolite is lent, and the £460 would be forgiven because a ruined man wanted a dead surveyor's memory, and the only piece of it left alive was a niece nobody else had a use for. And Mr. Culliver, she said slowly, who has bought my father's chests. He is a proprietor in this enclosure too, I suppose. The largest, after the Duke. Then you are selling the same information twice, uncle. Once in the chests and once in me. Ambrose Quillen looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him decide to be honest, because honesty at that particular moment cost him nothing. You will write to me, he said, once a fortnight. You will tell me how the Duke's claim stands, and what papers he holds, and what he keeps out on that moor at night. Mr. Culliver is a generous man to those who are useful to him. Do that, and your father's debt dies with the wedding. And there will be £100 settled on you besides, in your own name, which is more than any woman in this family has ever had. And if I do not write, then you will be a duchess in a cold house with a burned husband and no money of your own, and I shall be sorry for you. He set down the pen. Think of it as employment. You have always liked to be useful. She thought of the chain in the wet furrow, and her father's voice. The arithmetic must close. Very well, she said. She was married on the 14th of February, in the year 1818, in the church at Nethercross, with the doors open because the lock had rusted, and a wind coming up the aisle off the moor. There were 5 people present. Her uncle, who counted them. The Reverend Dr. Pentire, who read the service rather fast. Mrs. Pascoe, the housekeeper from Wraycombe Hall, in a black bonnet she had plainly kept for funerals. An old man-servant named Hebden. And the Duke. He came in at the last minute, out of the light, and Rosalind understood that he had timed it so that nobody should have to stand about with him beforehand. He was very tall. He wore black, and one black glove on his right hand, and the left side of his face was as any man's face, and the right side was not. The scarring ran from the corner of his jaw up along the cheekbone and back into the hair above his ear, smooth and silvered and long since healed, the way old ground heals where a fire has been. It had pulled the corner of his mouth a little, so that his face at rest looked as though he were about to say something dry. Her uncle was watching her. So was Mrs. Pascoe, so, she realized, was the Duke, out of the corner of his eye, in the manner of a man checking the weather he already knows is coming. Rosalind looked at him for exactly as long as she would have looked at anybody, and then she looked at the prayer book, because it was the 14th of February, and there was a service to be got through. Afterwards, in the porch, the Reverend Dr. Pentyre shook the Duke's hand with his fingertips and said, in the voice of a man who has rehearsed the sentence, that there was no ill feeling in it, that the tithe must be considered, and that the commissioners would sit at 11 on Lady Day. The act is the act, the Duke agreed, and put on his hat, and that was the end of his conversation for some time. They drove out of Nethercross at 2 o'clock, with the sky the colour of a wet sheet. Rosalind sat with her back to the horses because he had handed her in first and taken the other seat without being asked, and she spent the first 2 miles composing sentences and discarding them. Her trunk was on the roof. In the bottom of it, under her linen, was a work bag, and sewn into the lining of the work bag was a small book of 96 pages, bound in green marbled paper, and on the pages was her father's field book of the survey of Ellersmoor, made in the summer of 1791, every bearing, every measure, every offset, in his small upright hand. Her uncle had sold the maps. He had not thought to ask what a map is made from. "You have not asked me anything," the Duke said. "I have been counting the miles, Your Grace. It is a habit." "How many?" 4 1/4 to the turn at the smithy, and by the sound of the wheels we came off the gravel a 1/4 mile back, so we are on your ground now." He turned his head then and looked at her directly for the first time, and she saw that his eyes were grey and perfectly ordinary, and rather tired. "That is correct," he said. "Then why did you write to my uncle for me by name?" The carriage went over a culvert. The wind had got up off the high ground, and was coming at the window in handfuls. "Because your father walked my boundary when I was a schoolboy," he said. And he set his mark on 22 stones between Ninewells and the Broken Cross, and every man who saw him do it is dead or past 80, because there is an Act of Parliament that will take the whole of Ellersmoor and cut it into allotments by the 25th of March, and my claim to the ancient bounds of it rests on my own oath. He paused. "My oath is not worth the paper it is sworn on. You will hear why within a week of getting to the house. You may hear it from the servants, or from the parish, or from me. I would rather it was from me, but I find I would rather it was not today." "Then not today," Rosalind said. He looked out of the window for a while. "You did not flinch in the church," he said. "No. Why not?" "Because you were watching to see whether I would," she said, "and I did not care to be a piece of information." The Duke made a sound that in a warmer man would have been a laugh, and did not speak again until the gates. Wraycombe Hall sat with its back to the moor, 4 square stories of pale stone, and every one of its tall windows was clean, and behind almost every one the shutters were folded back on empty rooms. Rosalind had expected a ruin. It was worse than a ruin. It was a house kept in perfect order for visitors who had stopped coming. Mrs. Pascoe took her cloak in a hall the size of a chapel, floored in black and white marble, with a great winter light pouring in through the south windows, so that the whole space stood bright and clean and cold as the inside of a shell. On a marble-topped table by the door there was a silver salver, polished until it threw the window back at the ceiling. There was nothing on it. "Your Grace," said Mrs. Pascoe, and it took Rosalind a moment to understand that she was being addressed. "Mrs. Pascoe, how many are you in the house?" "4. Your Grace, indoors, myself, Hebden, 1 kitchen maid, and Amos Kearney, who is 17 and does the horses and whatever else is wanted." The housekeeper had a flat coastal voice, and she used it without apology. There were 26 when the old Duke was living, and the others would not stay? Some would. Their families would not have it. Mrs. Pascoe folded the cloak over her arm. "You will find the house cold in the passages and warm where he is. He has the fires lit in whatever room you are to be in from the morning. He will not say so." Rosalind looked again at the empty salver. "How long," she said, "since anybody left a card there?" Mrs. Pascoe's mouth tightened, and for the first time something in the woman's face opened a little. 9 years at Michaelmas, she said. The Duke was in the library, which was the only room in the house where the air moved warm against the face at the door. There was a fire built high, and 2 chairs at it, and the second chair had been brought in recently, because the carpet under its feet was a different color from the carpet around it. He did not mention that either. "I said you should hear my terms," he said. "Here they are. You will have the south rooms, which are the dry ones, and Mrs. Pascoe's keys if you want them. You will have 400 a year settled on you, whatever happens after Lady Day, and it is settled already. The deed went to my solicitor before the license did. You will not be asked for anything that is not written in the settlement." He stood at the mantel with his gloved hand resting on it. "And there is a thing I want of you, which I will pay for separately, and which you are free to refuse. The Moor. The Moor. The commissioners will publish their draft award at the Ring o' Bells at Nethercross on the 25th of March. Objections must be made that day, in writing, supported by written or ancient evidence, not by testimony, not by a gentleman's word." His jaw moved. "I have gone through this house room by room. What is left is one perambulation of the parish bounds made in 1783, which is in the church chest, and your father's survey which my father's executors sold, and which is now in the hands of Mr. Barnaby Culliver of Fallowfield, who wants my moor for sheep-walk and means to have it. What happens if he has it? 1,400 acres go under fence. 41 families lose the right to cut peat there, which is the only fuel they have, and the furs they burn under the ovens, and the pasture for a cow apiece." He said the number 41 very slightly differently from the others, and she noticed it and did not know yet why. "And I lose the only thing I have left to be of use for." Rosalind sat down in the second chair, in the warm, and untied her bonnet at last. "Then you had better hear my terms," she said. "I did not know a wife was permitted terms," the Duke said. "You have just given me 400 a year for nothing. I imagine you are not much troubled by what is permitted." She held up one finger. "First, I want the muniment room, whichever room that is, with a table under a window and the chimney swept, and I want it understood that when the door is shut, I am working and not sulking." "Granted. Second, I want a horse that will stand still while I write, and Amos Kern 3 mornings a week to carry the arrows and hold the far end of a chain. I will teach him. He will be worth twice his wages by April. Granted. 3rd, she looked up at him. You will tell me the truth when I ask for it, even when the truth is unpleasant to you, because I cannot survey a boundary out of a story. If I set down one thing that is wrong, Miss Culliver's people will find it, and they will use it to break everything else I have set down. True or not, one bad measure ruins the whole traverse. So I will ask you unpleasant questions, and you will answer them. The fire moved. He looked at it rather than at her. That is a harder thing than 400 a year, he said. Yes, that is why it is 3rd and not 1st. Granted, said the Duke of Wraycombe. Then here is the first of them. Where is your father's survey now? Precisely. Not who has it. Where does it lie? Fallowfield. Culliver had 4 chests off a land agent named Quillen on Tuesday last. I know, Rosalind said. The agent is my uncle. I watched them go down the passage. She reached into her workbag and drew out the little green marbled book and set it on the arm of his chair. He sold my father's maps, Your Grace. He did not know to ask for the field book they were drawn from, because he has never made anything in his life. Every bearing is in there, and every measure, and the offsets to every mark. The maps at Fallowfield are the fair copy. This is the original. He did not touch it. He looked at it the way a man looks at water when he has been 3 days without any. You had this in the church, he said, in my sleeve. And you did not say, I had not decided about you in the church, and now? Now you have swept a chimney for me and moved a chair to the warm side of the fire before I came into the house, said Rosalind, which I am told you will not admit to, so I shall not press you. I have decided enough to begin. He was quiet a long moment. There is a 4th term, he said at last. You did not ask it, so I will give it to you. Wraycombe is not a house anyone calls at, and you will find that out on Sunday. Whatever they say to you, you are free to go into Exeter or to Bath at any hour, and take the 400 with you, without giving me a reason. That is written as well. You have made it very easy to leave. I have made it possible, he said. There is a difference, and I have thought about it a great deal. The muniment room was on the north side, cold as a dairy, with a barrel-vaulted ceiling and presses of black oak from floor to roof. By the 3rd day it had a fire in it, a lamp, a long table under the window, and Rosalind Ansell, Duchess of Wraycombe, in an apron with her sleeves pinned back, sorting 9 generations of paper into piles on the floor. She found leases, marriage articles, the manor court rolls stopping in 1758 in the middle of a sentence about a stray heifer, and 4 bundles of estate correspondence tied with tape gone brown as tea. She did not find a map of the moor. She was not looking for one. She was looking for anything that named a mark. That was the trick of it. And it was the only trick she had. An enclosure commissioner cannot see a boundary. He can only see evidence of a boundary, and there are 3 kinds: the written record, the physical mark on the ground, and the memory of old people, sworn. Her father used to say that the 3rd kind was the strongest and the shortest lived, because a stone will keep for 400 years and a man for 80, and the man is the one who can tell you what the stone means. The field book gave her 22 marks. Between them they made a ring around Ellersmoor 1,400 acres wide, and the ring closed. She checked the arithmetic on the 2nd evening, adding the courses down a long column while the wind sat on the chimney. The traverse ran out from the hooded stone, and came home to the hooded stone within 11 links, which for a man walking wet ground with a chain in 1791 was as near perfect as the world allows. 63 chains and 40 links out. 63 chains and 40 links home. Her father's arithmetic closed. She wrote the list of marks out fair, and she took it to the library that night, and the Duke read it standing up, with the paper held close to the candle. The hooded stone, he said. The broken cross. Ninewells thorn. Dunnacombe head. The grey weather. Sheepwash bar. He stopped. The cot at Ninewells. The 11th mark stands 20 paces east of the cot at Ninewells, by my father's offset. What is at Ninewells? A ruin, he said. A shepherd's cot with no roof to it. It is not a place anyone goes. Then we shall go on Thursday, she said, when the ground is hard enough to walk. And she did not see his face, because he had turned the paper to the light. They began on the Thursday, and by the 2nd week of March they had walked 11 miles of frozen peat between them. It went like this. Amos Kern carried the arrows and the chain, 66 feet of brass links that rang like a poor bell every time he set it down. Rosalind carried the field book, a pocket compass, and a stick of black chalk. The Duke carried the rest, because his right hand would not close on anything smaller than a spade handle, and he did not offer to explain the glove, and she did not ask. They found the grey weather in the first hour, sunk to its shoulders in heather with the lichen grown over her father's chisel mark, and she scraped the lichen away with her thumbnail, and there it was, J.M., and a broad arrow, and the number of the page in the field book where the measure lay. Her hands shook, and she blamed the cold. They found Sheepwash Bar. They found Dunnacombe Head. They lost the whole of a Tuesday in a bog that was not marked in any book, because in 1791 it had been a stream. And on the days when the weather sat down on the moor and made the work impossible, she went into the parish instead with Mrs. Pascoe, who was Nethercross born and cousin to half the cottages on that side of the moor. If you have come this far with Rosalind, out onto the cold ground with the chain and the iron pins, then stay with us and subscribe, because everything that is buried on that moor comes up before the end, and the part I have been waiting to tell you begins the night she follows the light. Widow Sabra Prynne was 81 and lived at the Nethercross end of the lane, with a fire of Ellersmoor peat, burning in a hearth so low she had to bend to it. Bounds, she said. Ah, they beat the bounds in my time, my dear. The whole parish out, and the boys carried on shoulders. At every mark they set you down, and they bumped you on the stone. Bump, so you should remember it. I was bumped at the hooded stone in the year the old king was ill, and at the broken cross, and at Ninewells. And I remember every one of them, because it was done to me. Would you say so, ma'am, before the commissioners at Lady Day? On oath? The old woman looked at her over the peat smoke. You are his wife, she said. The burned one. I am. They say he let men burn. I know what they say. And you're out on that moor with him at 7 in the morning with a chain. Sabra Prynne sucked her teeth. My turf ground is Ninewells side. 51 year I have cut there. If Fallowfield fences it, I shall be cold, and being cold at 81 is the same as being buried, only slower. She nodded once. Put my name down, girl, I'll swear. On the Sunday she learned what her husband had meant about the house nobody called at. They sat in the Wraycombe pew, which was at the front and boxed in oak, and the parish came in behind them and sat down, and was very quiet indeed. Afterwards, in the churchyard, 3 separate women looked at Rosalind, arranged their faces, and turned to speak to somebody else with great warmth about nothing at all. The 4th did not turn away, which was worse. "Duchess," she said, "how brave you look." She was perhaps 30, fair, beautifully dressed for a country parish, and she had come across the grass on the arm of a heavy, handsome man in a bottle-green coat. "You have the advantage of me, ma'am." "Camilla Frere. My husband is Mr. Roland Frere of the Commission." The lady's glance went past Rosalind's shoulder to where the Duke stood alone by the porch with his hat in his hand, and came back again, having taken a full inventory. "I knew Wraycombe a little, a long time ago, before he came home," and she smiled, and moved on. Mr. Roland Frere stayed a moment. He had a broad, pink, agreeable face and the kind of easy manner that made men like him at once and go on liking him for years without ever asking themselves why. "You are surveying, I hear," he said, "with a chain and iron arrows and the kern lad. Nethercross has no secrets, ma'am, only slow news." He laughed comfortably. "Take a word from me, since nobody else here will give you one. The Commission wants evidence, not romance. Any labourer with a bar and an afternoon can set a stone in a bog and swear his grandfather knew it. Your husband would do better to accept a fair allotment quietly than to make a spectacle at Lady Day. Nobody is served by opening old ground. That is a curious way to speak of a boundary, sir. I speak of everything the same way," said Mr. Frere pleasantly, and went to hand his wife into her carriage. Mr. Barnaby Culliver called at Wraycombe Hall on the Tuesday, which was the first carriage to come up that avenue in 9 years, and he came with her uncle beside him. Rosalind received them in the small saloon because the Duke had gone down to sheepwash, and she had decided on the instant that she wanted them to herself. Culliver was a rope and timber merchant out of Bristol who had bought Fallowfield with the profit of a war, and he was not ashamed of it, and Rosalind found she could not entirely dislike a man who was not ashamed of anything. "Miss Culliver, you have 4 chests of my father's papers. I have. Paid 180 for them, and worth it." He tipped his glass at her. "You'll want them back. I want to see them." "There is a difference." "There is," Culliver agreed. "Here's my offer, since you're a plain speaker and I've no patience with the other kind. Advise me instead of him, and when the award is signed I'll make you a present of the chests, instruments and all. Your father's own theodolite is in the 3rd one, in green baize." I looked. Rosalind's fingers tightened, and he was watching for that, and she let him see it, because there was no purpose in pretending. "And in return?" "In return you tell me nothing at all," said Culliver, "except this. What's the 11th mark? Your uncle has had a letter from you saying the marks are found and the traverse closes, and there's 22 of them, and every one is named in your list but the 11th, which you write down as at Ninewells, and nothing more." The room went very still. Rosalind did not look at her uncle. She had written that letter in the 2nd week carefully, saying nothing that was not already known in the parish, and she had thought herself rather clever. She had forgotten the first rule of her own trade, which is that a gap in a record is itself a record. She had drawn a ring of 22 marks and left one of them blank, and a man like Culliver could read that blank from 12 miles off. "It is a fallen stone in bad ground," she said. "Then say so in the letter next time," said Culliver, "and I'll believe you." He set down the glass. I'll be plain, ma'am, because you'll hear it soon enough from people who mean you less kindly. There's a story in 3 parishes that the Duke keeps something living out at Ninewells and carries food to it after dark. Frere believes it. Frere would like nothing better than to have it dug up in front of the commissioners at Lady Day, whatever it is, and I'd sooner have a Moor than a scandal, but I'm not the one who decides what gets said in that room. Think on it. They left at 4. From the window she watched her uncle look back once at the house, and she stood well away from the glass. That night she could not sleep, and at a little after 1 she went to the window of the south bedroom to draw the curtain against the draught, and stopped with her hand on the cloth. There was a light on the moor. It was low and small and warm-colored, and it moved. It went out from behind the stable block and across the black ground in a long, steady line, dipping where the ground dipped, standing still twice, for the space of a slow count of 20, and then going on northwest, until at last it stopped altogether and did not move again. She counted the minutes on the case clock in the passage. It was gone 41 before the light came back the other way. She watched it 3 nights out of 5. On the 3rd she stood at the cold glass in her shawl until her feet lost all feeling, doing the only thing she was good for, which was measurement, the bearing by her pocket compass, northwest by west a half-west, the time, the distance, judged by the 2 standings, which she thought were the 2 gates. Northwest by west a half-west, from the stable block, 40 minutes' walk. She went down to the muniment room at 2 in the morning and laid the field book open and stepped it off with the dividers, and the line ran out from Wraycombe across Dunnacombe Head, and it ended, as neatly as a ruled line ends, at the 11th mark. The cot at Ninewells. She sat back in the dark with the dividers in her hand. In the kitchen, the talk was of a beast, a thing kept at Ninewells that had once been a man, that could not speak, that howled in a thaw. Mrs. Pascoe, asked directly, had said, "I go where I am sent, Your Grace, and I am not sent there," which was the only time in 6 weeks that the woman had refused her anything. The obvious thought had come to her, of course, wearing the clothes of common sense, that she had married a man the whole county believed had let 41 men burn, and that she was in a lonely house on the edge of 1,400 acres where nobody would hear anything at all. Against that, she set what she had. 6 weeks of a man who walked out at first light, in a wind that made her eyes stream, and who never once suggested the work was too hard for her, who could not fasten a button with his right hand, and had never asked her to do it for him, who had sat up until 3 with a magnifying glass, copying her father's offsets, in a slow, careful, left-handed script, because she had said her wrist ached, who had put a warming pan in her bed for a week in February, and let Mrs. Pascoe be thanked for it. And 41 families on the moor, and 41 men who had not come off the Aurelia. She had heard him say that number twice now, and both times it had come out of him in a slightly different voice from the rest of the sentence, the way a man says a thing he has counted more often than he has said. She followed the light on the 16th of March, 9 days before Lady Day, in boots she had bought for the moor and a dark cloak, with the compass in her hand and no lantern of her own, because a second light out on that ground would have been seen for 3 miles. The frost had gone and the peat gave under her, and twice she went in over the ankle and had to haul herself out by the heather. But the light went ahead of her, patient, dipping and rising, and all she had to do was keep it at the same size and not gain on it. At the 2 gates it stopped, both times, exactly as it had from the window, and both times she understood why when she came up behind, the gates were hung badly and had to be lifted, and a man with one hand must set his lantern down to do it. Then the ground rose to Dunnacombe Head and fell away, and below her in the black cup of the moor was Ninewells, a ruin of a cot with the roof timbers standing bare like the ribs of something, a spring running out of the bank behind it, and the light standing still in the doorway. She came down the last 200 yards very slowly, and stopped at the corner of the wall. The cot was not a ruin. The near end of it was, and that was what any traveller on the high road would see, if any ever came within a mile of it, which none did. But the far end had been roofed with turf-overcut poles, tight and low, and there was a stovepipe of old sheet iron going out through the gable stones, and a bank of dry turf as neat as any Rosalind had seen in the parish. And there were stones everywhere. Along the top of the wall, along the sill of the one window, in rows on the flat ground by the door, hundreds of them, all of a size, all set out in ranks like men on parade, and every one of them had been chosen from the same white quartz that outcrops on the nethercross side, so that they showed in the dark, faint and grey, like the lights of a town seen a long way off. She counted the first 3 rows without meaning to, because she was her father's daughter, and her hands and her eyes did that, whether she asked them to or not. 14 in a row. 3 rows, and a 4th row not finished. She was still standing there when a man came out of the doorway with a bucket. He was not tall. He was thin as a hurdle, in a soldier's greatcoat gone the colour of the moor, and his head was bare, and the whole of one side of his scalp and neck was scarred smooth and hairless and long-heeled, the way the Duke's was, but further gone. He stopped when he saw her. He did not shout. He made a small sound, high and thin and frightened, and dropped the bucket, and went backwards 2 steps with his hands out in front of him, palms open, and Rosalind understood 2 things in the same instant with a completeness that took the strength out of her knees. The first was that he was terrified of her. The second was that she had seen that face before, in a small oval portrait in the library at Wraycombe, in a red coat, with hair. "I am not going to hurt you," she said, as steadily as she could. "I am Rosalind. I live at the house." He looked at her mouth while she spoke, and then he looked at the ground. And then, in a hurry, as though he had remembered something he had been taught, he bowed. It was a proper bow, from the waist, the bow of a man raised to make it in drawing rooms, and he made it in a ruined doorway on a black moor to a woman in a wet cloak, and something turned over in Rosalind's chest and would not turn back. "You are Kit," she said. "Christopher Ansell." He put one hand flat on his own breastbone and kept it there. Behind her, out of the dark, the Duke said her name. She turned. He was 20 feet off with the lantern in his left hand, and he had stopped dead, and in 9 years he had probably never looked at another human being with the expression he was wearing then. It was not anger. She had prepared herself, walking out, for anger, and had decided she could stand it. This was worse. He looked as a man looks at the moment the shot goes off and he does not yet know whether it has hit him. "How long have you known?" he said. 6 days. I took a bearing from the window. "Of course you did." His voice had nothing in it at all. "You have written to your uncle every fortnight since you came." Twice, both letters are copied out in my own hand in the muniment room, in the second press. And you may read every word tonight, and there is not one thing in them that is not already told in the ring o' bells. She kept her voice level, because if she did not, she would lose it. Culliver offered me my father's chests on Tuesday to tell him what stands at the 11th mark. I said it was a fallen stone in bad ground. That is the only lie I have told since I came into your house. The lantern shook, very slightly, and he set it down on the wall, and the light went up under his face and made the healed side of it strange. "Kit," he said, "go in. Go on now, it's all right." The thin man in the greatcoat looked from one of them to the other. Then he came forward, past his brother, and picked up something from the top of the wall and put it into Rosalind's hand, and closed her fingers over it with both of his, and went inside. It was a white quartz pebble, cold and smooth, the size of a bird's egg. "He gives one to whoever comes," said the Duke. "There is only ever me. How many are out there?" 41, said the Duke of Wraycombe. "He is not finished. He will not be finished. When he gets to 41, he starts again." The rain came on then, thin and steady, and they stood in it. "You wanted the unpleasant questions answered," he said. "Sit down out of the wet. It is a long one." They sat on the bench inside the turfed end, which was warm from a small iron stove and low and smelled of peat and tallow and clean wool, and which was, Rosalind saw, kept as carefully as any room she had been in, a bed made square, a shelf of 9 books, a razor, a tin of soft soap, a comb. Kit sat on the floor by the stove with his back to them and his hands busy, sorting white pebbles from a heap by size. The Aurelia was a transport, the Duke said. 1,200 tons out of Bristol, chartered to bring the army off the Spanish coast in the January of 1809. The ships lay in the roads a week waiting on the wind, with 200 men in the hold of a vessel meant for 140. Kit was 19. He was an ensign because my father bought him a commission to get him out of the way of a girl in Taunton. I was 26, and I was the mate of the watch, which on a chartered transport means nothing at all except that you are the man they hang the blame on if there is any going. What happened? The spirit store was in the forehold, under the men. On the 4th night a party of officers had it broached, not the army, the ship's own people, and one passenger who was neither. He was looking at the stove. There was a lantern taken in among the casks. It went over. That is the whole of it. 41 men in the forehold, and a fire between them and the ladder. And you? I was on deck. Kit was below. He had gone down to sleep among his own men, which was not the custom and which was the sort of thing he did. He came up through the forehatch with his coat alight and told me what was burning and where. Then he went back down. The Duke's gloved hand lay in his lap and did not move. I went after him. We got 7 of them up the after-hatch before the deck came in. He was under it. I got him out and I do not remember it. And my hand shut on something that was on fire and would not open again for 4 months. And the 41 stayed where they were, he said. There was a court of inquiry at Plymouth in the April, he went on. A court of inquiry is not a trial. It has no power to punish and no obligation to be careful. And its business is to produce a cause because the owners wanted their insurance, and the service wanted the thing finished before the spring. There were 9 witnesses. 7 were the ship's own people, who had every reason on earth not to say that the fire began in a spirit store their officers had broached. And there was a gentleman of the commissariat, who had been a passenger, who had been at that cask himself an hour before, and who gave his evidence very well. He had a clean coat and a good manner, and he was not a sailor. Rosalind sat very still. What did he say? That in the confusion he had seen a young officer carrying an open light forward, into the forehold, at the beginning of it. The Duke's voice did not change at all. Which was true. Kit went down with a lantern. He went down with a lantern, because the forehold was already alight, and there were men in it who could not find the ladder, and my brother was the sort of fool who does not stop to consider how a thing will be described afterwards. The court took that evidence, and the court found that the fire arose through the negligence of Ensign Christopher Ansell, who was recorded as having perished in it. They blamed the man they thought was dead. They blamed the man everybody could agree to blame. It cost nobody anything. The insurers paid, the ship's people kept their places, the gentleman of the commissariat came home and married well. He turned his head, and I was found to have left my post which I had, and to have shown a want of conduct, which perhaps I had. And I was permitted to sell out, and my father was still living then, and did not speak to me again. And Kit came off that beach in a fishing boat with his head opened and his scalp burned and half a lung of smoke in him, and he was 3 months in a house at Passages before anybody knew whose he was, and when I got him home in the November, he could not speak, and has not spoken since. He knows me. He knows his own name. He can write 4 words and no more. Whatever the beam did, it took that from him. The Duke's gloved hand closed slowly on his knee, the whole hand at once, like a thing worked by a lever. I had already sworn he was gone. It was in the return I signed at Plymouth in the January, before I knew, and it is in the parish register at Nethercross, and it is on a tablet in that church, with his name cut in it, and I have sat under it every Sunday for 9 years. Then bring him forward, Rosalind said. Now tell them. And they will hang him, said the Duke. The stove ticked. Kit had put down his pebbles and was watching them both, and Rosalind saw that he understood a great deal more than he was given credit for, and that he had heard this argument before, and that he knew how it ended. He cannot answer a charge, the Duke said. He cannot say where he stood, or what he carried or why. He would sit in a room in Exeter while men who were not there described him, and there is a finding of a court on paper that says he burned 41 men alive, and there is nothing on any paper anywhere that says otherwise. If I produce him, I have also to admit that I returned him gone when he was living, which is a fraud upon the service and upon the estate, and I will be believed about that, and about nothing else. He looked up. I have had 9 years to find the flaw in it. There is no flaw in it. There is only silence, which keeps him breathing, and which costs me a name I have no particular use for. Rosalind thought of the salver in the hall, polished every week by a woman who had watched 22 servants leave. It costs you more than that, she said. It costs me nothing that a man cannot do without. It costs you the more, said Rosalind, which is not yours to do without. It is 41 families' fuel. She had not planned to say the number. It came out of her because it was in the front of her mind, and she heard it land, and she watched her husband's face, and wished for a moment that she had bitten it back. Yes, he said at last. I had noticed that as well. She got up, and went and stood over him, and put her hand flat on the black leather glove where it lay on his knee, which was the first time she had touched him since the 14th of February, when she had put her hand in his in a cold church in front of 5 people. "Then we shall have to find the flaw," she said. "You have had 9 years, and you have been looking at it alone, in the dark, in a house where nobody comes. That is the worst possible way to check a piece of arithmetic. I have a different method. I take the figures out of the office and I walk the ground." He did not move his hand. He did not look at her. "You should go into Exeter," he said. "The 400 is settled. Nobody would think a thing of it. I know, you made it possible. I have thought about it a great deal." She took her hand away. "Kit, may I count them?" The thin man in the greatcoat looked at his brother, and then he got up and lit a spill at the stove and led her out into the rain with a lantern, and together they went along the rows of white stones on the wall and on the sill and on the flat ground, and Rosalind counted aloud, and at 14 he touched her sleeve and said nothing and looked pleased, and at 28 he did it again, and at 41 he stopped and stood back and put both hands at his sides. 41, said Rosalind, every one of them a man. Kit Ansell nodded, and then he took her wrist and turned her hand palm upward and set into it, very deliberately, 1 more stone. A 42nd. Who is that one for? He pointed at the doorway, where his brother was standing with the light behind him. She walked home over Dunnacombe Head at 5 in the morning, with the sky going grey behind the sea, and she did the sum as she walked, because it was the only way she knew to hold a thing that size. The problem stated plainly was this: to keep Ellersmoor, she had to prove the ancient bounds. To prove the ancient bounds, she had to bring 3 commissioners, a clerk, a jury of proprietors, and any of the parish who cared to follow, up onto the moor to view the marks. The 11th mark lay 20 paces east of the cot at Ninewells. 20 paces. She had chained it herself, 1 chain and 12 links, on a bearing of east by north, from the corner of the ruined gable. Whichever way she turned it, the same figure came out. Save the moor and lose Kit. Save Kit and lose the moor. Her father would have said the arithmetic did not close, and that when a traverse does not close, you do not argue with it and you do not fudge it. You go back out and you find the measure you have not taken. There was one she had not taken. She had spent 5 weeks proving the ring of stones, which was the written and the physical evidence, and she had barely touched the 3rd kind, which her father had called the strongest and the shortest lived. Memory, sworn, she began the next morning in her oldest boots, with a fresh book ruled into 6 columns, and she did not stop for 8 days. 6 columns. The name of the commoner, the cottage and whose it was, the right claimed, turbary for peat, a stovers for furze and thorn, pasture for a beast, the ground on which it had been exercised, described by the marks she now knew better than the lanes of her own girlhood, the number of years and from whom the memory came before that, and last, the signature, or, more often, the mark, a cross, a hook, a little drawn spade, made with a borrowed pen by a hand that had never held one. The first 3 cottages would not open the door past the chain. The 4th was Sabra Prynne, who came out to the lane and walked her down to the next 4 herself, and stood there with her arms folded while Rosalind wrote. On the 3rd day the Duke came with her. She had not asked him to. He simply appeared at the gate at 7:30 with the pony and a satchel and said, "You will want a 2nd book. If you carry it all in one and drop it in a leet, we are finished. And then he walked into the yard of a cottage where the family had not spoken to a Wraycombe since the year 1809, and took off his hat, and stood where the light fell on him, and asked a turf cutter's wife whether her husband's father had cut on the Dunnacombe side or the Ninewells side. Rosalind watched the woman look at the healed side of his face. She watched her decide, in the ordinary way of people who have work to do, and a duke in the yard, that it was after all only a face. Ninewells side, the woman said. Always. My husband's father, and his father afore. That was the whole of it, and it was not a small thing. By the 5th day 2 men had come out to the road to meet them. By the 6th, someone had left a pot of cream at the hall gate with no name on it, and Mrs. Pascoe carried it into the kitchen and had to go and stand in the scullery for a while. 52 names by the 8th evening, 52 rights, with ground and years and marks, and the oldest memory in the book running back through Sabra Prynne to her own grandmother, which put a woman cutting peat at Ninewells in the 1730s, and every one of them within the ring of the 22 stones. It was on the 7th day that Rosalind came to the last cottage on the Ninewells track. It stood alone, low, with a lean-to at the gable end, and there was a stack of turf outside it built better than any she had seen. Coursed like masonry, the sods laid grass down at the base and grass up at the top, the corners squared, a proper cutting of the rain off the whole face of it. She stood and looked at it for a full minute. That is not a countryman's stack, she said. No, said the Duke, it isn't, and knocked. Elias Hessel was about 50, with a grey rope of hair and a leg that had been broken and set by somebody in a hurry, so that he came to the door sideways, hauling on the jamb. He looked at the Duke, and his face shut like a box. I've cut there 50 year, near enough, he said, before either of them spoke. My tools is my own. I've no rent owing. We are not here about rent, said Rosalind. I am writing down every right of Tilbury on Ellersmoor before the 25th, so that when Mr. Culliver's people say nobody ever cut there, there is a book that says otherwise. That is all. May I have your name and your ground? He gave them slowly. She wrote. And while she wrote, she looked past him, because the door was open and the light was on the lean-to wall behind him, and on that wall, on 2 pegs, there was a tool she had seen exactly twice in her life, both times in a boatyard at Topsham with her father, a caulking mallet, long-headed, of live oak, worn to a shine. Beside it hung a 2-foot rule of boxwood, and a broad axe, and a spike iron, all of them kept oiled. You were a ship's carpenter, Rosalind said. Hessel's hand went still on the door. Carpenter's mate, he said. Long since. In what ship? The silence went on a moment too long, and in that moment Rosalind Ansell felt the whole thing turn over under her like ground giving way, and she put her pen down very carefully on the ledge of the window, because her hand was no longer to be trusted with it. Say it, said the Duke, in a voice she had not heard from him before. You know it, said Hessel. You've knowed it since the day I come up this moor. You give me the cot and never asked me a question in 9 year, and I took that as what it was, and I've held my tongue in this parish like a man holding a door against water. His chin came up. Aurelia, 1,200 ton, out of Bristol. I were carpenter's mate, and I were in the forehold when she went. Missed, Hessel, said Rosalind. How did the fire begin? Spirits, said Elias Hessel. The second mate had the store broached the 4th night out of the roads, and there was 5 or 6 of 'em at it, and one of 'em weren't ship's people nor soldier neither. A commissary gentleman. clean coat, very free with the ship's rum for a man that never paid for it. He spat sideways into the yard. He set his lantern up on the cask heads to see the cards by. Up on the cask heads, ma'am, on the round of 'em, where it wanted only a heel of the ship. I told him. Carpenter's mate telling a gentleman. He laughed, and he give me a shilling. And then she healed, said Hessel. That's all. That's the whole of it. 90 seconds and the forehold were a furnace, and me under a fallen shore with my leg broke, and the ladder gone. Who came down? Young Mr. Ansell come down. He said it looking at the Duke, with a light in his hand which they made much of after, and I'd like to know how else a man's to see. He come down into that, and he got 4 of us to the after hatch, and then his brother come down after him and got the rest, and I were the last but one out, hauled up by the collar by a man whose own coat were alight. His mouth worked. I were landed at Falmouth in a fishing smack with my leg in a splint. Nobody ever come for me. There were a court at Plymouth in the April, and I heard of it in the August, in a public house, from a man reading a newspaper aloud. They'd put it on the young one, on the one that went down first, and you did not come forward, said Rosalind. Come forward where, ma'am? He looked at her almost with pity. I can't write my name. I've no more standing than the turf I cut. The court were done, and signed a Wednesday, and I heard of it a Thursday, 4 months after, and the gentleman as set the lantern up were took home in a chaise, and married a lady, and I were a lame man with a splint. What would you have me do, walk to Plymouth and knock? Rosalind picked her pen up again. You could tell 3 commissioners, she said, on the 25th of March, at 11 o'clock, at the Ring-o' Bells at Nethercross, with the whole parish in the room. They'd not hear it. It's naught to do with the Moor. It has everything to do with the Moor, said Rosalind, because one of the 3 commissioners is a gentleman of the commissariat with a very clean coat, and his name is Roland Frere, and I should like to know whether you can put a face to him. Elias Hessel went the colour of the ash on his own hearth. Frere, he said. Aye, that were the name on the shilling man. He let go of the door frame. I've the shilling still. It is not enough, the Duke said that night in the library. A lame turf cutter says a commissioner was drunk at a cask 9 years ago. Frere says he was not. There it stops. No court in England reopens a finding on that. I know, said Rosalind. That is why we are not going to ask a court. We are going to a room in an inn with 3 commissioners in it, and a clerk taking a minute, and half of 3 parishes standing at the back, and the newspaper from Exeter, which sends a man to every award because the awards are printed. She spread her hands on the table. I cannot get your name cleared, Gideon. I can get it said out loud, in front of the county, by a man with no reason to lie, in a place where it must be written into a minute, and Frere cannot answer it without explaining what he was doing on the 4th night out of the roads. That is not a verdict. It is a great deal better than a verdict, because a verdict can be argued with, and a room full of neighbours cannot. He had used her name perhaps 4 times since February. He used it then. Rosalind. If the room hears about the Aurelia, the room hears about Kit. Somebody in it will ask where the ensign is buried. Somebody in it will remember that no one has ever been up to Ninewells. Yes, she said. That is the second half of it, and I have no answer to it yet, and I am going to keep working until I have. The notice of claims came out on the 18th. Any proprietor might inspect the claims lodged at the clerk's office at the Ring-o' Bells between 10 and 4, and Rosalind was there at 10. Mr. Culliver's claim ran to 11 pages, and against the great bulk of it there was nothing to be said. It was the last article that she read 4 times. And the said Barnaby Culliver claims the soil of the waste called Ellersmoor, as parcel of the manor of Fallowfield, and in proof thereof produces a survey A&D map of the parish of Nethercross, and the lands adjacent, made by Josiah Meade, land surveyor, in the year 1791. The clerk brought it out flat on a board. It was her father's paper. She knew the sheet before she knew anything else. The weight of it, the blue-gray cast, the watermark of a horn that she had held up to a window 100 times as a girl in a room that smelled of ink and beeswax. It was his lettering along the top. It was his north point, drawn like a lily. It was his scale bar, and his signature at the bottom right, Jos, Meade, Serve, with the little chain of 5 links he drew after his name the way another man would flourish, and running from the grey weather to Sheepwash Bar, cutting Ellersmoor away from the manor of Wraycombe, and folding the whole 1,400 acres into Fallowfield. There was a boundary in a hard black line that her father had never drawn in his life. She put her face close to the paper. The first thing was the surface. Where the old line had been, the paper had been scraped with a knife and burnished, so that the new ink had feathered along its edge in a fine bloom. You could not see it at arm's length. You could see nothing else at 3 inches. The second thing was the pricks. Her father set his stations with a needle, a single prick through the sheet at every angle, and drew to the pricks. Hold any Meade map to a window, and it is full of little stars. Rosalind turned the board to the light, and there they were, the whole honest ring of them, and along the new black line there was not one. The third thing was the lettering. Somebody had written the word Fallowfield in a bold copperplate across the top of the moor, and Rosalind had grown up in a house where the rent books were kept in that hand, the capital F made with a little upward hook on the crossbar, the same on every letter she had ever had from her mother's brother. The fourth thing was the arithmetic, and the fourth thing was the one that mattered, because a commissioner will not squint at feathered ink, and will not care whose F it is. She took out the field book. She laid the courses along the new line one after another, and added them in the margin of her own notes, and the sum of them from the grey weather to Sheepwash Bar came to 61 chains and 8 links. Her father's traverse for the same run said 63 chains and 40 links. 2 chains and 32 links missing. The width of the strip somebody had needed to swallow to make the moor lie inside Fallowfield. And because those courses were part of a ring, the ring no longer came home. Run the whole boundary, as this map now had it, and you finished 2 chains and 32 links away from the stone you had started at. It does not close, Rosalind said aloud, to nobody, in a cold office at the back of an inn. The clerk looked up. "Ma'am, may I have a copy of this article and the loan of a candle?" She worked until 4. When the clerk turned her out, she walked the 2 miles home over the top with the book against her chest, and she was almost at the avenue before she let herself understand the rest of it, that her uncle had not merely sold her father's chests. He had taken a dead man's honest hand and scraped it and written a lie in it and put the man's own name at the bottom. That night she told the Duke everything except the last part, and then she told him the last part too, because they had a bargain about unpleasant answers. "He will be ruined," Gideon said. "Yes, you do not have to be the one who does it. There is nobody else who can," said Rosalind. "That is generally how it works out." They dug the 11th mark on the 24th, in sleet, with 3 hours of light. It lay where her father had left it, 1 chain and 12 links east by north from the corner of the ruined gable at Ninewells, and it had gone down under 130 years of peat growth, so that only the crown of it showed, no bigger than a loaf. They cut the turf back in squares and laid them aside, and then the 4 of them went at it with spade and bar. Hessel on his knees because his leg would not let him stand to a spade, Amos Kern shifting the wet peat, Rosalind on the bar, and the Duke lifting with his left hand and his shoulder and the stump-fingered right, braced under the shaft. Kit worked beside them the whole time. He had come out of the cot when he saw the spades and had taken the second bar without being asked. At dusk they had it clear to the base, a grey slab set on edge, 4 feet in the ground and 2 above it, with a chisel mark on the face that came up under Rosalind's thumb as clean as the day it was cut. J.M. A broad arrow. The number of the page. She sat back on the wet ground and laughed, and could not stop for a moment. And Kit Ansell watched her with his head on one side, and then laughed too, silently, which was the first time she had seen it. Then she took out the field book and turned it to the back, where there was a clean leaf, and she wrote at the top, "Tomorrow, the 11th mark, is viewed. Every person in this parish will stand 20 paces from this door." And under it she wrote 2 words, and put the pencil into his hand, because he could write 4 words in the world and no more. He could write Kit, he could write Gideon, he could write yes, and he could write no. The Duke said, "Rosalind," and she held up her hand, and did not take her eyes off his brother. "It has been decided for you for 9 years, she said, "by men in a room at Plymouth who never saw you, and by one man in a house who loves you. Not tonight. Tonight you have the pencil." Kit looked a long time at the page. The sleet came across the moor in a grey curtain and went over them and away. Then he bent down over the book and wrote in the big, careful letters of a schoolroom copy, yes. The long room of the Ringo bells held 60 in comfort. On the 25th of March there were 140 in it, and the rest of the parish stood in the yard with the windows open to them, in a thin sunshine, with the smell of wet wool coming up off everybody. The 3 commissioners sat at a table on the little stage where the fiddlers sat at Christmas. Mr. Sowerby in the middle, a dry Yorkshireman of 60, who had been a working surveyor for 40 years before he was anything else. The Reverend Dr. Pentire, on his left with the tithe papers. Mr. Rowland Frere on his right, pink and easy, with his wife in the second row of chairs. The clerk read the draft award for 50 minutes. When he came to the 4th schedule he read, and the said waste called Ellersmoor, containing 1,394 acres, is allotted as parcel of the manor of Fallowfield to Barnaby Culliver, Esquire. The sound the room made was not a word. It was the sound 140 people make when they let out a breath they have been holding since Christmas. "Objections," said Mr. Sowerby the Duke stood up. He was bare-headed, and he stood in the middle of the floor where every face in the room could see the whole of his, and he did not hurry. "I object to the 4th schedule," he said, "and I lodge it in writing. And it is supported by the perambulation of the bounds of this parish made in 1783, produced by the churchwardens out of the parish chest, by the original field book of the survey of Ellersmoor made by Josiah Meade in 1791, by 22 boundary marks now standing and uncovered upon the ground, every one bearing the surveyor's chisel, and by a book of the rights of common exercised upon that moor, containing 52 names with their marks, the oldest running back 4 generations. "Who made the survey?" said Sowerby. "The Duchess of Wraycombe." There was a stir at that, and a laugh from somewhere near the door, and Mr. Frere leaned forward with his elbows on the table. "Mr. Sowerby, with every respect to her grace, a commission does not hear ladies." "A commission hears evidence," said Sowerby, "and I have 40 years of squinting at other men's chain work behind me, and I am a surveyor before I am a gentleman, and I will hear whoever made this. Stand up where I can see you, ma'am." Rosalind stood up. She had been terrified for 6 days, and she found on her feet that she was not terrified at all, because it was only arithmetic, and she had checked it 11 times. "Mr. Culliver's claim rests on a map," she said, "which is produced as my father's work of 1791. 3 parts of it are my father's work. The line from the grey weather to Sheepwash Bar is not." "Prove it," said Frere. "I shall prove it 4 ways, and the 4th is the only one that matters, so I will be brief with the others." She had the board brought forward. "First, the paper along that line has been scraped and burnished, and the new ink has feathered into the tooth of it. Second, my father set every station with a needle prick, and drew to the pricks. Hold the sheet against that window, sir. You will find a prick at every angle in the parish, and not one along this line." Sowerby got up himself, took the board to the window, and held it up. From where Rosalind stood she could see the little constellation of light come through the paper, the whole honest ring of stars, and the black line running across the empty part of the sheet where there was nothing at all. The room saw it too. 140 people leaned. "Third," said Rosalind, "the lettering across the Moor is not my father's, and I will name the hand it is on oath later today if the commission requires it, because I was raised in the house where those rent books are kept." Somewhere behind Culliver, a chair scraped, and Ambrose Quillen went out through the side door, and did not come back, and Rosalind did not turn her head. "Fourth," she said, "the traverse does not close. My father's field book carries the run from the grey weather to Sheepwash Bar at 63 chains and 40 links. The line on that map, laid off by its own scale, gives 61 chains and 8 links. The difference is 2 chains and 32 links, and it is missing. And because the boundary is a ring, it is missing from the whole. Walk the moor as that map has it, gentlemen, and you will come home 2 chains and 32 links from the stone you started at." She set the field book down on the table in front of Sowerby, open, my father's arithmetic closed to 11 links in 1,400 acres of wet ground. Whoever redrew that line did not know that a boundary has to come home. He was not a surveyor. He was a man with a pen. There was a silence of about 4 seconds. "I bought that map in good faith for £180, said Mr. Barnaby Culliver, standing up at the back, off a land agent named Quillon, "and I have the receipt, and I'll thank the commission to note I've just this minute watched him leave by the side door. I'm a timber merchant, not a fool. I withdraw the article." They viewed the moor at 2 o'clock. It is 3 miles from the Ring o' Bells to Ninewells, and the whole parish walked it. Rosalind never afterwards forgot the look of that procession from Dunnacombe Head. 3 commissioners, a clerk with an inkhorn, 40 proprietors, Sabra Prynne on a cart, and a long dark stream of people coming up the peat road behind them, out onto ground that was about to stop being anybody's question and start being theirs. They viewed the 11th mark at 4. It stood clean out of the ground with the turf squares laid back beside it, and J.M. cut sharp on the face, and Sowerby knelt in the wet with his glass and grunted, and the clerk wrote it into the minute. Then Mr. Roland Frere, who had been quiet for 2 hours, looked past the stone at the cot 20 paces east, with its turfed roof and its stovepipe, and its rows of white stones along the wall, and said, in a voice pitched for the crowd, "And what is this?" "Ellersmoor keeps a squatter." "No," said the Duke of Wraycombe. "Ellersmoor keeps my brother." Kit came out of the doorway. He came out with his head bare and the burned side of it plain in the afternoon light, and he stood in front of 140 people with his hands at his sides. And Rosalind, who had walked up beside him as far as the wall, thought that of all the brave things she had ever seen done, that was the bravest, and it took 9 seconds. "Christopher Ansell," said the Duke, ensign, who went into the forehold of the transport Aurelia on the night of the 17th of January 1809, and brought 4 men out of it, and has not been able to speak since. "I returned him gone. He was not gone. I have let this parish call me what it liked for 9 years, rather than deliver him to a finding that put the fire on his head." "That finding," said Frere, "was made by a court, sir, and I will not stand on a moor and hear." "Then hear me," said Elias Hessel, "for I were under the shore with my leg broke, and I seen who set the lantern on the cask heads, and I seen him give me a shilling to hold my tongue, and I've held it 50 year worth in 9, and I've the shilling in my hand this minute." He held it up between 2 fingers, and his hand was perfectly steady. "You'd a green coat that night, sir, and you took your neckcloth off for the heat, and you've a mole on the left side of your chin under the whisker, and I'll say it in any room in England." Roland Frere said, "That man is dead," and then heard himself say it, in front of the whole parish, with the man standing 11 feet away, and it was the last thing he ever said in that county that anybody listened to. The commission sat again on the 27th. The award, when it was signed in the June, allotted Ellersmoor within the ancient bounds to the manor of Wraycombe, excluded the ground about Ninewells from enclosure altogether, and set out in a schedule the 52 rights of turbary, estovers and pasture, by name, by ground, by mark, exactly as Rosalind's book had them. That schedule is the reason a man may still cut peat on the Ninewells side, and it is the only place in the printed award where the phrase, "as surveyed by her Grace, the Duchess of Wraycombe," occurs, and Mr. Sowerby put it in himself. The rest went the way such things go, which is to say slowly, and then all at once. Ambrose Quillen went to Bristol in April and was never charged, because there was nobody with the appetite to prosecute him, and never employed again in 3 counties, because there was nobody with the appetite for that either. In August, Lavinia wrote to ask whether her cousin the Duchess would present her at Bath. Rosalind answered civilly and did nothing whatever, which she found she could live with quite easily. Mr. Culliver sent the 4 chests up from Fallowfield on a Tuesday cart, with a bill for £180, and a note, "I've no patience with gestures. Pay when convenient. B. C." She paid it out of her own settlement within the week, and unpacked her father's theodolite from its green baize herself, and set it on the table in the muniment room where the light was best. The minute of the 25th of March was printed in the Exeter paper on the 28th, and copied into 2 London papers the week after. because the Aurelia had been a famous thing in its day. In June, a memorandum came out of the Judge Advocate's office stating that the finding of 1809 was not to be taken as evidence against Ensign Christopher Ansell, and that no proceedings were contemplated. It was 11 lines long. Gideon read it twice, put it in the drawer with the field book, and mentioned it a fortnight later at breakfast, in the middle of a sentence about drains. The tablet stayed on the wall of the church at Nethercross, because Kit went and looked at it and shook his head when the sexton offered to take it down. The churchwardens had a second line cut underneath instead. It says, A&D came home. The first card came on the 2nd of April. Mrs. Sowerby, on his way north, left it in the hall at Wraycombe and stayed an hour and a half arguing about chain allowances on sloping ground. Mrs. Pascoe carried the salver into the library that evening with the one card on it and set it down on the table between their 2 chairs without a word, and went out and shut the door. By June there were 17. By Michaelmas the tray would not hold them, and Hebden began a second one. Lady Camilla Frere's card came in July, from an address in Bath, the Freres having given up the neighbourhood, and Rosalind returned the call when she was next in that city, and stayed exactly 20 minutes, and was perfectly kind, and did not sit down. Ninewells was slated and floored before the autumn. Kit would not come to the hall to live, and nobody pressed him, but he came down to it 3 days a week and worked in the garden, and on the 4th he walked to Sabra Prynne's and sat by her fire, and the parish, which had spent 9 years being frightened of a light on the moor, got used to him with the speed of people who have decided to be ashamed of themselves later. He set the 41 white stones into the wall of the cot beside the door, mortared in with his own hands, and then he went on gathering, because he still gives one to whoever comes. Rosalind keeps them in a bowl on the muniment room table, and there are a great many of them now. It was in the 2nd week of April, in the library, with the fire down to red and the house quiet, that she said, "Will you take the glove off?" He was still a moment. It is not pleasant, nor is a bog at 7 in the morning, so he took it off, and laid the hand on the arm of the chair, palm up, and let her look at it, 3 fingers gone at the second joint, the palm drawn and smooth and silver, the whole thing long healed, and 9 years old. She took it in both of hers and turned it the way she would have turned anything she meant to understand properly, and then she lifted it and put the ruined palm flat against her own cheek and held it there. "There," she said. "That is what it is for." They set a new boundary stone that summer at the 6th mark, where the old one had gone into the leat, and they cut it themselves in the yard, the broad arrow, and J.M., and under it R.A., and the year 1818. Amos Kern carried the far end of the chain out from the grey weather. Rosalind read the links and Gideon wrote them down left-handed, and they went the whole ring in 4 days, and on the evening of the 4th she added the column up in the doorway at Ninewells, with the light going. 63 chains and 40 links out. 63 chains and 40 links home. "It closes," she said. "Thank you for staying to the end of it. Tell us in the comments which town or city you are listening from, and what part of Rosalind's story stayed with you, and if you would like more of these, subscribe, and there will be another fire lit here next week."